I froze with my fork halfway to my mouth. My grandmother had just said, in front of 12 people seated around her dining room table, that she had been wiring me $3,000 every single month for 3 years. She said it the way you'd say, "Please pass the salt," casually, like I already knew. I did not already know. I set my fork down very slowly because my hands had started to shake, and I didn't want anyone to see that. The table was loud a second ago, my uncle telling a story about his golf trip, my cousin's kids arguing over who got the drumstick, my mother laughing at something my brother-in-law said. And then my grandmother's voice cut through all of it, clear and steady, the way it always has been, and the whole room went quiet at once. 3 years, she said again. Every single month. I set up the wire transfer myself. I looked at her from across the table. She is 75 years old and she has never once in my life said anything she didn't mean. She was looking directly at me, but there was something in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Not confusion. Not the soft kind of worry she gets when she asks if I'm eating enough. Something harder than that. Deliberate. "Grandma," I said, "I don't know what you're talking about." The table went so quiet I could hear the candles flickering. Let me back up, because none of this will make sense without the full picture. And I want you to have the full picture, because I spent 3 years not having it, and I know exactly how that feels. My name is Claire. I'm 29 years old. 3 years ago, I graduated with my nursing degree and took a job at a hospital 40 minutes from the town where I grew up. I was proud of that job. I still am. But nursing school had left me with a mountain of student loans, and my starting salary was not what anyone would call comfortable, especially after rent, car payments, and the kind of medical bills that show up when you're a 26-year-old with no cushion, and the kind of stress that makes your body stage a protest. I was not drowning, but I was not swimming either. I was treading water with a weight around my ankle, and I had gotten so used to the feeling that I stopped expecting anything different. My older sister, Rachel, had always done better financially. She married her husband, Daniel, right after college. Daniel works in finance. They bought a house. They drive nice cars. They take 2 vacations a year and post about both of them. I don't say that with bitterness, or at least I didn't. Not then. I just accepted that we had made different choices and ended up in different places, and that was fine. What I didn't know was that the gap between us was not entirely a matter of choices. My grandmother, my mother's mother, the woman who taught me to bake and to read and to stand up straight, had watched me struggle from a distance for about 6 months before she decided she was going to do something about it. She told me this later. She said she didn't tell me at the time because she knew I would argue with her. She knows me well. She reached out to Rachel because Rachel lives 20 minutes from our grandmother and had been her primary point of contact for family logistics for years. She asked Rachel to help coordinate the transfers. She explained the amount. She explained the purpose. She said it was for my student loans and my rent and whatever else I needed. She said she wanted it to be a surprise, but she also wanted it to go to the right places. Rachel said she would take care of it. For 3 years, Rachel took care of it, just not in the way our grandmother intended. I found out about none of this until my grandmother's 75th birthday dinner, on a Saturday in October, at the long oak table in her house where I have eaten probably 1,000 meals. My grandmother had made pot roast. She had made it herself, which is something she insists on doing for every family gathering, no matter how many times my mother offers to bring something. The table was full. My parents, my brother and his girlfriend, Rachel and Daniel, 2 of my cousins, my uncle and his wife, and me. I had driven up alone because I was coming off a night shift and I almost canceled. But my grandmother had called me the week before and said, "I need you there," which she has never said before in my life. And so I came. I thought it was just a birthday dinner. I thought she wanted the family together. I had brought her a card with a hydrangea on the front because hydrangeas are her favorite, and a bottle of the wine she likes that I had saved up for. And I had ironed my blouse in the parking lot of a rest stop, using the travel steamer I keep in my car because I had come straight from work. And that is the kind of thing you do when you are 29 and running on 4 hours of sleep and trying very hard to seem like you have it. Together. I did not have it together. But I was trying. Dinner was warm and loud and good the way those dinners always are. My grandmother sat at the head of the table and watched everyone eat with the kind of satisfaction that has nothing to do with the food. I watched her do it and I thought, this is the most content I have ever felt in a long time. Just being in this house, at this table, with these people. And then she set down her wine glass and said my name, and she said she had been wiring me $3,000 a month for 3 years, and everything changed. Rachel's face did something I will never forget. It was fast, barely a second, but I was looking right at her when it happened. Her jaw tightened, her eyes went somewhere and then came back. And then her expression smoothed over into something that looked like confusion, which was almost impressive given the circumstances, except that I know my sister's face better than I know almost anyone else's, and what I saw in that half second was not confusion, it was calculation. "Grandma," Rachel said, and her voice was warm and even. "What do you mean? You set up transfers to Claire's account?" "I set up transfers to an account," my grandmother said. "The account number your husband gave me." The table was very still. Daniel reached for his water glass. He took a sip. He set it down. He did all of this very carefully. "I'm sure there was just a mix-up," he said. "Bank stuff is complicated. Wires can get misrouted." "For 3 years," my grandmother said. "Every single month." "Grandma." Rachel's voice had a new edge in it now, something I recognized from childhood arguments, the tone she uses when she has decided to hold a position regardless of what comes at her. "I think you might be misremembering. Maybe you set up the transfers but never actually initiated them. That happens." I looked at my grandmother. She is 75 years old and has run her own bookkeeping business for 40 years. She retired 6 years ago and still reconciles her personal accounts by hand every month because she says spreadsheets are for people who don't trust themselves. She does not misremember wire transfers. "I have the receipts," my grandmother said. She reached down beside her chair and placed a folder on the table. It was a plain manila folder, the kind you get at any office supply store. She set it in the center of the table between the pot roast and the bread basket. She folded her hands in her lap and she looked at Rachel and Daniel, and she did not say anything else. Daniel laughed. It was a short laugh, a social laugh, the kind that says, "Let's all acknowledge this is a little awkward and move on." He is very good at that laugh. I have watched him use it at every family gathering for 5 years. "Look," he said, "I'm sure we can sort this out. Probably a clerical thing. Claire, did you ever check if maybe some transfers came through to a savings account you forgot about? Sometimes banks auto-open accounts during—" "I have 2 accounts," I said. My voice sounded strange to me. Flat. "I know every dollar that goes in and out of both of them." "Right, but Daniel." My grandmother's voice was quiet and clear, and it stopped him completely. "I spoke with a forensic accountant." Rachel put her fork down. "I spoke with him 10 days ago," my grandmother continued. I had been trying to understand for some time why Claire never mentioned the transfers. At first I thought she was simply being private about it, the way she is. Then I thought perhaps the amounts were not making a difference and she was embarrassed. Then I started asking questions. She opened the folder. She did not make a production of it. She simply opened it and laid the pages flat on the table. And I watched my brother-in-law's face do something I have never seen it do in 5 years of knowing him. He went white. Not pale, white. The forensic accountant had traced 36 wire transfers over 36 months. Total amount, $108,000. Every transfer had cleared from my grandmother's account. Every transfer had landed in the same place. A joint account in Rachel and Daniel's names. Rachel's chair made a sound against the floor as she shifted. "Grandma, I can explain." "Can you?" my grandmother asked. "It wasn't. We were holding it. We were going to help Claire with it strategically. Like, not just dumping it in her account all at once, because she's not always the best with money. I'm a nurse," I said. "I budget my medication supplies for an entire floor." "That's different." Rachel. My uncle, who had not said a word since my grandmother placed the folder on the table, said her name in a tone I had never heard from him. He is normally the loudest person in any room. He was not loud right now. "Stop talking." Daniel had shifted into a different mode. I watched it happen. He straightened in his chair. He smoothed the front of his shirt. He looked at my grandmother with an expression I can only describe as corporate, the face of someone who has decided to treat this as a negotiation. "I understand how this looks," he said, "and I take responsibility for the lack of communication. That was wrong. But I want to be clear that nothing improper happened with those funds. We used them for household expenses that we incurred specifically because of how much time Rachel was spending helping you. The driving, the grocery runs, the coordination. We absorbed significant costs. $108,000 in household expenses," my grandmother said. "Over 3 years. Daniel." She said his name the same way she said Rachel's. "Clean. Final. I know about the car." He stopped. My cousin, who is 22 and had been staring at her phone for most of this, looked up. In January of last year, Rachel and Daniel had bought a new car. A lease, Daniel had told everyone. They had posted a picture of it on Instagram. It was a nice car. I remember thinking, good for them. It was not a lease. The forensic accountant had found the purchase record. $61,000, paid in a single transaction, traced back to a consolidation of funds that ran through 3 accounts, 2 of which belonged to Rachel and Daniel, and one of which was a business account that Daniel had opened 18 months prior that my grandmother knew nothing about until 10 days ago. I did not know any of this while it was being said. I found out the details later. In that moment, I was sitting at my grandmother's birthday table trying to understand that the life I had been living for 3 years, the careful budgeting, the extra shifts, the times I said no to things because I couldn't afford them, the month I rationed my vitamins because I had a car repair and something had to give, all of it had happened alongside a river of money that was supposed to reach me and had been rerouted instead. $108,000. My sister, who I used to share a bedroom with, who I called when I got my nursing license, who stood next to me at our cousin's wedding and slow danced with me when no one else was on the floor. Daniel pushed back from the table. I think we should take this offline. This isn't the appropriate setting. You will sit down, my grandmother said. He sat down. She reached into the folder and laid another sheet of paper on the table. It was a single page, dense with small print, with a signature at the bottom in blue ink. That is a letter from my attorney, she said. It was filed with the county clerk 4 days ago. It pertains to the house. My grandmother owns a house, a 3-bedroom on a quiet street 2 towns over from here, the house where my mother and my uncle grew up, the house that my grandmother has rented out for the past decade to help cover her living expenses. It is worth, in the current market, approximately $400,000. My grandmother had mentioned, at various points over the years, that she intended to leave it to her grandchildren equally. Rachel and Daniel had approached her 2 years ago about managing the property for her. She had agreed. They collected the rent. They handled the maintenance calls. My grandmother had recently discovered that Rachel and Daniel had, 14 months ago, he had her sign a document during a visit she described as confusing and rushed. She had just come back from a minor procedure and was not fully herself. The document, as presented to her, was described as a property management authorization form. It was not a property management authorization form. My grandmother found out what it actually was when her attorney called her, unprompted, to ask about a refinancing inquiry on the property. My grandmother had not initiated any refinancing inquiry. Rachel made a sound. I don't have a word for it. It wasn't a word. It was the sound a person makes when the floor drops out from under them. The filing corrects the document, my grandmother said. The property remains in my name, with a restricted designation. Rachel and Daniel are removed as authorized agents effective as of this past Monday. Daniel was on his phone. I watched him type. I watched his thumb move fast across the screen. He was texting someone. I found out later he was texting his own attorney. You can't just Rachel started. I already did, my grandmother said. My attorney tells me that in addition to the civil matter, what has been described to her constitutes criminal fraud and elder financial abuse. She has already been in contact with the appropriate parties. My mother had not said a single word since my grandmother placed the folder on the table. I looked at her. She was looking at Rachel with an expression I don't know how to describe. Not shock exactly. Something more like grief. My uncle stood up. He walked around the table to my grandmother's chair and put his hand on her shoulder. My grandmother reached up and covered his hand with hers, and for a moment they just stayed like that, and I had to look away because it was too much to watch. Daniel stood up. He said something about needing to make a phone call and walked toward the front of the house. Rachel sat perfectly still and stared at the middle of the table. My brother, who is 24 and has never been comfortable with conflict, quietly took the bread basket off the table and put it in the kitchen. I don't know why. I think he just needed something to do with his hands. I looked at my grandmother. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. When you started suspecting something was wrong, why didn't you call me? She looked at me steadily. Because I needed to be certain, she said. And because I did not want to put you in a position of accusing your sister without proof. I know how much you love her. I had to swallow twice before I could speak again. How long did you know? I began to suspect when you told me last Christmas that you were picking up extra shifts to cover your car insurance. I had sent what I thought was 12 months of support by that point. I did not ask you directly because I wasn't certain, and I didn't want to embarrass you or accuse Rachel unfairly. She paused. I should have asked sooner. I'm sorry for that. My grandmother was apologizing to me. I looked at Rachel. She was still staring at the table. I waited for her to look up. She didn't. Rachel, I said. She looked up. I have a lot of things I could have said in that moment. I had, over the course of that meal, moved through emotions that don't have easy names. The shock, the arithmetic, running in my head, the memory of every specific month that had been hard for no reason. It turns out it needed to be hard. I thought of the month I cried in my car outside a pharmacy because I was trying to decide whether I could afford something. I thought of the birthday I spent alone because I couldn't afford the train ticket to visit people I loved. I thought of all the times Rachel had called to check in and asked how I was doing, and I had said fine, just tired, the usual, and she had said she understood, and I had believed her. I said, I covered a double shift the night before your anniversary dinner last year. You know that. I told you I was exhausted. And you said, I remember this. You said, I don't know how you do it. I could never live like that. Do you remember saying that? She didn't answer. I want you to think about that, I said. That's all. I didn't raise my voice. I've learned from years of nursing that the quietest version of something is usually the version that lands hardest. Daniel came back in from the front of the house. His face had changed again. He had made his phone call and gotten whatever answer he'd gotten, and it clearly was not the answer he wanted. He looked at my grandmother with an expression that was trying very hard to be conciliatory and landing somewhere closer to desperate. Margaret, he said. He uses her first name. He always has. She has never asked him to. I want to talk about how we move forward from here in a way that's fair to everyone. Claire deserves to be made whole, obviously. That's not in question. I think we can. You are welcome to speak with my attorney, my grandmother said. Her contact information is in the folder. I think if we just... Daniel, my uncle, still standing at my grandmother's shoulder. She told you to speak with the attorney. Daniel looked around the table. He looked at my brother, who was studying the tablecloth. He looked at my cousins, who were looking at anything but him. He looked at me. I looked back at him. He looked at the floor. Rachel spoke for the first time in what felt like a long time. Her voice was very small. We were going to pay it back. No one said anything for a moment. We were in a hard spot, she said. When Daniel changed firms, there was a gap and we had expenses, and I thought we'd pay it back before anyone found out. And then it just... Rachel, my mother said. And the way she said it, not sharp, not angry, just tired, made Rachel stop. They left shortly after. No dramatic exit. Rachel couldn't look at me when she said goodbye. Daniel shook no one's hand and walked to their car, the car, I now knew, that had been purchased partly with money meant to help me buy groceries and pay down debt. He did not look back. After they drove away, the house got quiet in a different way. My grandmother stood at the kitchen counter and cut the birthday cake she had made herself, chocolate with cream cheese frosting, the one she makes every year. She cut it carefully into equal pieces and put them on plates and brought them out one by one. I sat down at the table and I took the plate she handed me and I looked at the cake and I started crying. Not in a dramatic way. The kind of crying that happens when you've been holding something very tightly for a very long time and someone just hands you something gentle and your grip finally loosens. My grandmother sat down next to me and did not say anything for a while. She let me cry. That is one of the things she is very good at, knowing when the right thing is to say nothing. Then she said, the transfers will be redirected directly to your account. My attorney has also begun the process of a civil recovery for what was taken. Whatever is recovered beyond legal fees, you will receive. I wiped my face with my napkin. You don't have to do that. I know I don't have to, she said. I want to. I looked at her. Grandma, you hired a forensic accountant. Yes. For me? You are my granddaughter, she said, in a tone that suggested this required no further explanation. I thought about the folder on the table, the pages laid out flat, the way she'd opened it without drama, without raising her voice, without a single moment of uncertainty. She had known exactly what she was going to say and exactly when she was going to say it, and she had walked into that dinner with everything prepared and had waded through the pot roast and the rolls and most of the main course before she said my name, and I don't know how she sat with all of it that quietly for so long. How long have you known? I asked. The full picture. About 3 weeks, she said. And you waited. I wanted everyone present, she said simply. I didn't want there to be any dispute later about what was said and in front of whom. My grandmother is 75 years old. She has a college degree in accounting, a business she ran for 4 decades, and apparently the strategic patience of someone who has been planning this moment in detail while bringing homemade pot roast to the table. I told her that. She laughed. A short, genuine laugh that I haven't heard enough of lately. I also wanted the birthday dinner, she said. I worked hard on that pot roast. In the weeks that followed, the picture got clearer in ways that were painful and in ways that helped me make sense of things I'd been confused about for years. I won't go through all of it here. but some pieces deserve to be named. The forensic accountant found that the transfers had gone into the joint account, been immediately moved to a business account Daniel controlled, and then distributed across a pattern of personal expenses, the car, yes, but also a bathroom renovation, a vacation to Portugal, and a series of monthly transfers to a brokerage account. The documentation was thorough. My grandmother's attorney said it was actually more straightforward than many cases because Daniel had not been particularly careful about concealing the trail. He had apparently not expected anyone to look. He had expected my grandmother to be an old woman who trusted her granddaughter's husband and would not ask hard questions. He had expected wrong. There is a legal process ongoing, and I have been advised not to discuss the details. What I can say is that the property management arrangement has been fully unwound, my grandmother's house is secure, and I have retained my own attorney. I can also say that my grandmother's direct transfer to my account came through on the 1st of November, and I stared at it for a long time. It is not a feeling I fully have language for, to see a thing you didn't know you were missing arrive in the place it was always supposed to be. Part of me wanted to feel joy. Part of me felt something more like sorrow for the 3 years of not having it. I have started paying off my loans. I took a weekend off for the first time in 18 months. I went to see a friend I hadn't visited because I couldn't afford the travel. We went for a walk and got coffee, and she asked how I was doing, and I said, actually, better. And I meant it. My relationship with Rachel is something I am still figuring out. She has called me twice. The first call I did not answer. The second call I answered, and we talked for 40 minutes, and I cried again, and she cried, and nothing was resolved. And I don't think it can be resolved in a phone call, or maybe in a series of phone calls, or maybe for a long time. I don't know yet. I know that I love her because she is my sister, and I have loved her my entire life. I also know that she looked me in the eyes for 3 years and watched me struggle and said nothing. I don't know yet how to hold both of those things in the same hand. I know that I do not blame myself for not seeing it sooner. I want to say that clearly because I spent some time in the early days after that dinner going back through every conversation, every holiday, every phone call, trying to identify the moments I should have noticed. That is a bad road to walk. I know it from my work. I see patients do it all the time, excavating the past for signs they could have read differently. Most of the time, the signs were invisible from the inside. The people who hide things from you count on the fact that you trust them. That trust is not a weakness. It is what they steal. What I want you to take from this, if you take anything, is not the drama, not the dinner table or the folder or the forensic accountant or even my grandmother's expression when she said I already did. Those are the visible surface of something quieter. What I want you to take is this. My grandmother watched me from a distance, noticed something that didn't add up, and did not let it go. She did not confront anyone impulsively. She did not call me worried. She did not tip her hand. She quietly gathered information over months, spoke with professionals, filed the right paperwork, and then sat down to pot roast with 12 people and waited for the right moment. She is 75 years old and she fought for me like it was her full-time job. She didn't do it for praise. She's barely spoken about it since that night. When I called to thank her the Monday after the dinner, she said this is what people do for each other and asked if I was sleeping enough. I'm sleeping better than I have in years. If you have someone like that in your life, someone who notices what doesn't add up and does not let it go hold on to them, tell them you see what they do. Tell them it matters. And if you're the person in the story who's treading water, who's running on 4 hours of sleep, who's telling everyone you're fine when you're rationing things you shouldn't have to ration, I want you to know that sometimes the thing that's making your life harder is not a failure of your own. Effort. Sometimes someone has simply redirected the river. It doesn't mean you aren't strong. It means you deserved better, and someone decided to make sure you got it. My grandmother turned 75 with chocolate cake and cream cheese frosting at a table full of people, in the house where she taught me to stand up straight. She is the best person I know, and she has excellent timing.